Hi, everybody. My name is Jackson Pineau. I am the Public Affairs Manager here at Minneapolis Area Realtors. I'm going to walk you through the residential market update for the most recently completed month of May. This is our June 2024 webinar. Let's hop into it, shall we? So I'm going to walk you through this quick agenda. We're going to start with what everybody wants to see the most. That's the monthly housing charts. Then we will dive into some market segmentation and then the wider housing market after that. We'll probably find a few minutes for some questions along the way, but if I don't get to them, I'll make sure that I answer all the questions that we need. Then let me just take a moment and make sure I got all my notes here as well before we hop into that. Stealing the thunder from my little motivational speech for a second. Here we go. Great, we're reset now. So I want to start things off with a little motivational framework for you all. The story of two lumberjacks. So here's some photos, just non-historical. I'm not even sure if this is real. David and I found this the other day and we both loved it. So we want to use this as a model framework for this month. Two lumberjacks, if you could imagine them. They work alongside each other every day. They start and end at the same time every day. But one of them disappears for an hour every day to go and relax, while the other one is always chopping wood, never stops. So one day, the lumberjack who's always working, never has time to take a break, says to the other, I don't understand. Every day we start at the same time, we end at the same time, but you get to go and relax for an hour and we chop the same amount of wood. If not, you chop more than me. Why? How are you able to do this? Where do you go for that hour in the day? And the lumberjack looks up to his friend and he goes, oh, I'm not just wasting my time. I spend that hour to go sharpen my axe. So the motto here is be that lumberjack who takes time out of the day to sharpen your own axe. And you'll be able to chop down more wood than your friends, right? Get that certification. Work on understanding market data. Learn how to negotiate or market yourself better, whatever you need to sharpen your own air quotes axe to be the best version of yourself that you need to be for yourself, for your business, maybe for your family, for your clients. So that way you can find that time for yourself to show up better, right? And with that in mind, I hope that you'll see these market updates as a way for you to sharpen your axe, at least in some small regard. So let's hop into the May housing market updates, starting first with those monthly charts where we're going to be looking at just the most recently completed month, May in this case, and each May for the previous successive years, right? So 2024 May closed sales. There were 4,448 total closed sales. That's up 9% from 4,000 and change from last year, right? And that is the first time in a few years that we have gotten an increase in demand that wasn't caused by some sort of internationally news-making event like the COVID-19 pandemic, run on inflation, what have you, right? Yes, we are down from pre-pandemic levels, as you can see, and I'll grab my little laser pointer right here, little laser pointer. Yeah, we're at 4,400-ish, right? And that is down from where we were prior in the pandemic, prior to the pandemic at 5,800, right? But we are gaining back from a close to what, decade-long floor in 4,000, not the floor that we saw in 2011 and 2008 from the recession, right? But that is a floor within its own right. We are coming back out of it. Same story here in pending sales, where yes, we are down, and there is still time for those pending sales to become closed sales and make the marginal gains. As of right now, we're down about 5% in pending sales, 4,677 purchase agreements signed in the month of May. And what is that telling us, right? I mean, you both mentioned it yourself here at the beginning prior to recording. The two individuals who were early birds joining in early with me. We talked about the idea of interest rates are a big portion of this, absolutely. But keep this in mind, and we'll go into more detail later. Interest rates really haven't changed all that much in the past year. About a year ago, we were at 7%. We increased up to about 7.8, and then we resettled back down to 7% as a 30-year average nationwide, right? So buyer activity is starting to become accustomed to that. I'm not saying that that buyers aren't well aware of interest rates. They are, but it's not that fresh, harsh change that we were seeing that caused a almost 20% decrease from 2022 to 2023, a 12% decrease from 2021 to 2022. That effect is starting to become less of a prominent reason, and it's starting to become more of the norm, right? I want you guys to start to be aware of that, because your clients might be using slightly different language about monthly payments without necessarily talking about interest rates, right? And I'm sure some of you are already seeing this in some regard. Let's talk about the other side of the coin here. Instead of demand, let's talk about supply. And when I pulled this chart, man, it tells an interesting story. And I want to provide an opportunity, if anybody wants to say it live here in the chat with me. What's going on here? Relatively flat, 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 sudden drop off. Little increase, sudden drop off, flat, flat. There are two very big explanations as to what's happening here because of two major events that happened at a similar time of the year, one in 2020 and then one in 2023. Any guesses? I mean, they're obvious ones. They were life-changing ones for many people, right? We got COVID-19 is the difference between 2019 May and 2020 May, and that sudden drop-off in seller activity. And then again, interest rates to combat inflation were just after May of 2022. And then the full impact was noticed by May of 2023. That's that 16% drop off that you're seeing. What does this show us from a market economy perspective that we all should be aware of? Sellers are responsive to, I would say, two major things here, right? Yes, in context, these two stories, but generally they are systemic changes in the economy, whether that be because of interest rates primarily, right? Or they're also responsive to demand. Demand has gone down, particularly from 2022 to 2023, and part of that 16% drop is because of that. It's very interesting to see how clear that sort of trend is. And if you don't believe me about how new listings, i.e. seller activity, responds to buyer activity, let's go to the next chart here and let's put them on the same scale, right? Now we're looking at them at the same time, similar perspective, right? Line charts instead of bar charts, but it's basically the same thing. David talks about this and talks about the bubble effect of what you're seeing in oversupply, right? But you can use this to interpret the same message that I'm telling you about the relationship between closed sales to new listings. And you can see that closed sales in red here is consistently going up. And then what, 87 to 93-ish? supply in new listings was outpacing that demand, and a recorrection. And then what happened here? A very famous bubble that we all know of as the 2008, 2009 financial crisis, right? Oversupply, recorrection, right? And what have we learned since then? Blue tightly hugs red. And now when you are seeing a decrease in closed sales, look how tightly close that new listing line is. This is something that our entire nation's housing economy has had to learn over the decades, right? But due to different federal regulations, different lending regulations, and a difference in how we do business from the development side, these two lines are now more close than ever before, right? Something to keep it aware of when you are talking with your clients of saying, oh man, how come there aren't a lot of homes on the market? Well, this is one of those reasons. It's a natural implication to the regulations that we've put in, as well as a change in business practices, right? So let's talk about median sales price, because that's another thing that's on a lot of clients' minds. And I know you've probably seen this chart before, and I'm going to bring it up a few times in this conversation because now more than ever, we're talking about monthly payments, affordability, unaffordability, and most importantly, the value of a realtor and a value of home ownership. And this explains a lot of things. Now, most of the time I tell you stability is a flat line, like what we were looking at with median sales, new listings, right? We saw a flat line, a drop off, flat line, a drop off, right? That's not necessarily the case here. Stability in the case of sales prices, we want consistent, stable growth. That's the whole reason why we encourage people to invest, not just buy, but invest in their futures as a homeowner, right? So that's an example of what we're seeing here in this red dotted line between 2013 to 2014. Prior to that, financial issues with what was going on with overproduction of homes, lending practices. But from 2013 on, we had a fairly stable economic model here that was showing our concept as realtors in practice. You buy a home, you live in the home will gain that value over time. And that's what we call intergenerational wealth building, right? This is a good thing. This is what people can attain, right? And you can see we increased at a relatively consistent pace. The numbers here, yes, differ a little bit, but it's mid 5% to 7%, which is about normal of what we see, right? And then what happened with COVID? Shot up 17%, 9%. And again, this is just for May median sales prices, right? And then with the efforts to combat inflation, that line has now flattened off, right? And it's not the concept that prices are far outpacing what they have been traditionally. In fact, they aren't. We're up only 4% compared to last year at a median of $385,000. That 4% increase is low compared to what we were seeing here in that area of stability that I'm talking about, right? But that's not what people are necessarily feeling right now. It's because this is all in the context of living costs, something we'll dive into a little bit later. But another great way to visualize this is instead of looking at the absolute dollar sign numbers, the year-over-year change in median sales price can be a lot more volatile than what that one chart lends you to believe, right? This, instead of just looking at May, we're looking at every month here. And you can see, let's see if I can do a little drawing tool. I'm not as fluent with the presentation tools as David is, but I will try my best here. In the crudely drawn box that I am trying to make, you can see what is encircled here is that point of stability that I'm talking about. between what, 2014 to just prior to the pandemic in early 2020, right? That's that consistent positive. Blue bars mean positive year over year increase in median sales price. Home values are going up in a reliable and stable positive way. And then what happened? We saw this increase that was unsustainable, and then a reaction. And now we're at a 4.6% increase, 4.1 to 4.6, depending on when this chart was updated. But that's what we're seeing here is the stability is coming back to a new equilibrium, right? So let's talk about expectations when you're talking with your clients, especially when it comes to negotiations and what that new normal, air quotes, looks like, right? Prior to the pandemic, we were hovering somewhere around, in terms of May percent of original list price received. We were at just about what you were offering on the market originally is about what the median sale ended up being at. And then boom, some outliers here, 4% at the median over asking price. That means half got over 4% when they closed for 2 years. We started to correct back down in 2023, and now we are down to about where we were at pre-pandemic. That's an indicator for me that as far as the run on inflation of high demand, of people overbidding each other, is starting to get under control. Now, I'm still hearing stories about competition still being strong. May is always kind of a weird month. What, you got graduations, you got kids coming back from college. Uh, it's not necessarily a time for a lot of families in particular to go out and buy homes, right? Um, but that doesn't mean that the activity is not there. There's still high demand, as we will see. How high is that demand? Let's talk about another metric of that. And it is median cumulative days on market, the shelf life, if you will, of how much time does a listing stay on the MLS before somebody signs a purchase agreement and says, nope, we're going with this provisionally, right? We're about back to where we were at a median days on market figure of 15 days on market for half of all homes that were under pending contract in the month of May. That's similar to where we were in 2018, 2019, 2020, and definitely not where we were in 2021, 2022. Again, another indicator for me that the sudden surge, the rush, the speed of that market is adjusting back into a new normal. Excuse me. So one thing that has not really changed is the idea of inventory. Now, inventory is a little bit different here. It's worth explaining because I don't think I have explained this in a while. All the other numbers that I've talked about here are either direct totals, like new listings, closed sales, pending sales. It's just we total up the number of sales, right? Everything that is kind of more of a median, we take the median of it, that 50th percentile. Inventory is a little bit different. It's like asking how much water is in your bathtub while inventory is pouring in new water, houses, and demand is the drain that's having houses or water leave the market, if you excuse the analogy, right? The snapshot at the end of the month is what we use as an active inventory count, right? And what hasn't really changed much here is our need for more inventory here in the Twin Cities. Now, that inventory is needed at different price points and at different property types and in different areas, but overall, it's pretty much needed everywhere in all ways. Different degrees might be how much more it might be needed in different aspects of property types and price points, but still all there. You can see right now, as of the end of May, we had 8,414 homes still active on the MLS. That's up 13% from where we were a year ago, but that's still not where we were pre-pandemic at around 11,000, 12,000 homes left on market at the end of any of their respective May months, and not quite where we should be at. And where we should be at is not just in terms of absolute numbers here of thousands of homes, it's the number of homes relative to the demand, which is where we come to month supply of inventory, that ratio of demand to active inventory remaining on the marketplace. And I'm sure you all are keenly aware, David and I like to use the reference of anywhere between 4 to 6 months supply of inventory is what we would consider a balanced market. And you can see we haven't even broached that 4 minimum threshold in about a decade here. We have had a decade of seller activity, and it's been since 2021 hyper seller activity that has eased back into a slightly more competitive marketplace for buyers. We now have probably 2 in a week, 2 in 10 days ish of inventory. Given the amount of demand that we have in the marketplace right now, that's up 16% from where we were last year. And it is, yeah, considerably up from 1 month supply of inventory in May of 2021. But we still have room to grow. And this is something to keep in mind when we are talking about the relationship between sustainability of these homes as a product and the cost of homes and the cost of home ownership. Take a look to the left side of these charts. I don't often bring attention to something that's almost 2 decades old, but it bears witnessing here. This is the reason why we had the financial collapse in 2008, 2009. Well oversupplied. We had so much buyer leverage here. We don't have the same buyer leverage here. If people want to buy a home, this is the limited inventory. You can't have a financial collapse due to housing if there is no excess supply of which for us to have the price drop and be devalued, right? That is something that we, as Mar, as someone who is your local stats nerd here, I'm encouraging from a policy perspective that we help provide ways to increase inventory. That can only be beneficial for all of us. And in addition, it helps make homes more affordable because there are more options for buyers. So this has all been super helpful, but I want to make sure that I'm teaching you all how to fish in addition to preparing the fish for you. So I want to just do a quick little plug. And if you have any questions while I'm doing this little plug, feel free to type it into the chat. We got our market data webpage, for the most part, publicly available. There are a few things that do require MAR membership and MLS access to North Star, but I want to make sure you guys are aware of these tools. Things like InfoSparks, the North Star MLS tool that is possibly a gold standard when it comes to understanding what's going on in real estate. And it's so cool that you have that tool available as an MLS subscriber. Please make sure you're aware of it. It's so powerful. The local market updates, these are PDFs that are pulled straight from the MLS on a monthly basis that give you great summary data of different geographies. Please make sure you're taking advantage of them and sharing them with your clients. They are so insightful. If you're looking for a quick stat really quickly, our housing market sortable statistics webpage, same information as InfoSparks and local market updates. Again, publicly available, sortable, super easy to understand, and it gives you links straight to local market updates as well. And then I plugged it before even we recorded, but our daily showing activity is a highlight of our weekly pulse here at MAR. It is that far right tile there on our market data webpage. It'll bring you right to that blog that David writes every Monday. Please make sure that you're sharpening that axe. You're gaining that knowledge that you need through all these useful tools. It's all there, at the Minneapolis Area Realtors website. Now, I don't see any questions during that little pitch, so I'm going to move straight into market segmentation and talk about market share of different segments of the market and make sure that we understand where these areas are being represented. Now, again, I want to make sure that we're understanding what we're talking about here. Think about whatever topic is at the top, how much of closed sales in the annual basis, like so far for the year of 2024 and then all the completed years, right? What the market share currently is right now, right? So let's start with new construction, newly built homes, right? Simple enough. From our MLS data, we are seeing that as of right now in 2024, 14.5% of all homes that were closed on were part of new construction. That is higher than it has been in decades, and it is tantamount to being a multiple decades long high. We are just 0.4% off on that. And remember that rant that I just went on when it came to oversupply of the market. We're seeing similar stories, and some of you might be wondering, well, Jackson, you just warned me about this left side of the chart. Remember, we're not talking about absolute numbers anymore. We're talking about the share of new homes relative to the other homes that were sold. We're still down on homes being sold, like I showed you in the very first chart, but that share of homes is 14%. That's higher than it has been in recent memory, right? Another thing that is an interesting trend people need to be aware of is the idea of 4+ bedrooms. David's lovable title, "More beds, please." We're starting to question the idea of more beds, please, because you see we have a pretty positive increase from early, 2020, 2000s rather, all the way up until 2015, where we flattened off a little bit. And then in 2019 and 2020, a sudden spike, right? And that was initially, we had the estimate answered by the idea that everyone was working remotely in 2020. By May of 2020, it was a really quick, sudden shift. And now interest rates are down, and we want to make sure that you get the most bang for your buck. Why not buy that 4-bedroom house? We can each have an office since we suddenly have to work virtually now. The kids can each have a room, that sort of thing, right? But look, the trend has now gone flat, if nothing, gone down maybe a little bit. It certainly hasn't continued with historical norms of going up. We're at about 40% of all homes are closed, of all sales match this 4+ bedroom characteristic that we're looking for, but that's not near where we were at in 2020. And now there could be another answer to this, and something that we've been talking about as a regular trend. When we have higher interest rates, you can't stretch your dollar as far to be able to afford the 4+ bedroom. That could be an answer to this. Isn't necessarily the only answer. A lot of this comes down to availability of homes that are on the market, right? Are the homes that are 4+ bedroom in the areas that people who want those 4+ bedrooms want to live? Is there a right matching, right, between where they want to be and the type of home that they want? And are they preferring that home style, or are they preferring locations and making compromises on things like bedroom size, right? Things to keep in mind, and it's just so that way you're aware that trend has changed in some sort of way. But one change that has not occurred that we thought might have followed similar to this was the townhouse condo market share. Think the polar opposite of big houses that are often single family. Townhouse condo market share has dipped a little bit in the beginning of the pandemic to a low of 23% of all homes sold, right? And then increased suddenly in 2023 kind of abruptly to 27% and has stayed that way so far in 2024. Again, could be partly explained by making sure that you have the amount of money that you want to spend on a home that fits your needs. And part of that calculation is interest rates, right? So part of it can be explained. Part of it could be answered by the desire for a variety of housing options. The vast majority of our homes are single family homes. But this, to me, yes, you can see an increase, right? I'm seeing a lot more consistency here. There isn't a dramatic increase, although we could probably run some more elaborate tests than just Jackson's eyeball test to see if that's the case. It might be worth it. If you guys are curious in knowing if there is a statistically significant increase happening here, by all means, tap in the chat. Jackson, look into it, something like that. If not, I won't dig too deeply into it. I know you guys are interested in some other things going on. But let's talk about prices again in a different context, because context setting, I think, is really important here. Some of you have seen this before. David and I use this as another way to talk about the idea of visualizing exactly what a market bubble in real estate looks like in terms of price and why prices fell in 2008 and how that's different than now. So it's worth talking about here, right? In short, annual appreciation ranges based off of statistical averages are somewhere between the red dotted curve and the black dotted curve, conservatively. You can see the blue is your average sales price overall that peaked at one point in 2006 and due to the financial collapse, dropped shortly afterwards, right? We had too many homes. That is your bubble, the space above the red line and under the blue solid line. And ever since then, we've been below that lower bound, partly due to limited inventory, right? Fewer homes to buy, the higher that price ends up growing. In addition to the fact that there's just normal appreciation that is happening. And that catching up effect can be explained by a number of historical moments that ended up happening, right? So yes, we're aware of everything that happened up to the bubble, the crash in 2008, 2009, and then 2010 recovery and inventory shortage is what we were stuck with in so many ways, right? 2020 inflation, COVID, low inventory, higher rates, right? That's what's bringing us back up to that lower boundary. And that is something that, again, helps explain to us that this is not suddenly going to change. The basic market characteristics, regardless of anything that you might be hearing in the news, these are the market characteristics that are here to stay if you are buying a home, in any avenue. Now, let's talk about methods of home buying here and talk about the share of home financing. It has been the status quo for a little while now that the most predominant financing option here is conventional home mortgages, right? That 30-year fixed rate mortgage usually makes up a huge chunk of this, right? We're at about 70% in 2024, or sorry, 69% rounding up in 2024. And that's pretty similar to where it has been in the past 8 years, right? It's grown ever since we came out of the financial collapse where FHA funding was a lot more predominant, right? But there's something that David and I have been watching because a lot of you are really interested in that, and that is cash sales. Because cash sales have slowly, they decreased out of 2011 and have slowly increased since. And I say slowly because it's the scale issue here, because still conventional is the vast majority, and I want you all to keep that in mind as I go into the next few slides. But let's strip all that away and just look at cash sales. Now you can see it isn't quite as slow as I originally described it. When you're only looking at cash sales, it looks like there's a lot more of an abrupt shift that is happening, right? Because when people have the financial capacity to be able to afford purchasing a home for cash, especially in volatile stock markets, in questionable moments where the Federal Reserve is turning the faucet on and off when it comes to the flow of money exchanged in our economy, right? Real estate seems like the solid, stable investment because it will grow over time if you're patient enough, right? And that's what we are seeing. We are seeing more cash sales hopping from 10% in 2020 to now almost 18% in 2024 so far this year. We've already exceeded that share of cash sales out of all sales at 17.3% last year. Still not quite where we were at in 2011 when it was, again, very different market conditions. But something to keep in mind, because I'm sure some of you might be thinking immediately, yeah, well, Jackson, it's a really small segment of the market of clients that are capable of paying for this for a home with cash, and they're only interested in luxury, not necessarily. One way to indicate this, and David often goes into more detail than I do, but I want to make sure we're respective of time. We only got about 15 minutes here. Here's an indicator that I like to see. Single family, townhome, condo. We've now taken the same data that we had in that green bar chart, and we have spread it out into 3 separate line charts of those 3 separate property types. And you can see that it's not just your single family homes, which often correlate with luxury price ranges, right? Yes, that's 13%. And it is up from 2020. Absolutely. But look, townhomes are at 24%. 24% of all townhomes were purchased in cash at the end of 2023. And that's continuing in 2024. Condos, 41%. Those are often statistically below our median sales price, and they're still being purchased with cash. Some of people might be saying investment opportunities. Other people might be saying that it is the smartest use of people's money at the time. If you can afford it and you're living there, do it, right? Either way, whatever the implications are, it's something that you all should be aware of as a market force that is becoming more and more prominent throughout the post-pandemic era. So let's talk about housing market, less of David's and my data through the MLS and our interpretations, and more about an understanding of our economy and what's going on. Bear with me one moment while I stop a frog in my throat. NAR and Lawrence Yoon's research team are a great resource for us on a lot of these. The one drawback is last year, pretty much like clockwork, we released our webinars live the afternoon that they would release their NAR housing report. For some reason, we're a week ahead of them this year. And so I can't give you the May housing report because that comes out next Thursday at 9 a.m. Central time, Eastern time. But I can give you the April housing report, and I hope you will be happy with me for that. Sales, let's talk sales of existing homes by region and see who's winning, who's losing, right? In terms of sales. United States overall, we're down about 2% in units sold in April of 2024 compared to April of last year. Midwest, we're down only 1%, so that's not too bad. The South, on the other hand, down 3%. Northeast, down 4%. And the pesky West, They're up. They're the only ones beating us by the 4 regional categories we have right there. But we're not doing too bad. We are exceeding the nation's average in terms of units sold and that percentage change. Taking a look at housing prices, Northeast is up 8.5%. They are exceeding the United States average at 5.7%. And we are also at 6%. Now, the West, as normal, the Western states have fairly expensive median sales prices. So it's no surprise they're leading the charge here at an increase of 9.3%. Keep that in mind. The West is leading in these price increases because that's something that I'll touch on later, while the South is having the most modest growth at 3.7% increases. Now, Chief Economist Lawrence Yun was quoted in this report saying that home prices are reaching a record high for the month of April, and that is a very good thing for homeowners because price growth is important. However, the pace of that price increase should taper off because there is more housing inventory becoming available because of such high demand. Now, I want to make sure that that is something we are observing here as well. Again, he's looking at it from a national standpoint, and that's like Al Roker telling us that there's weather happening in the Midwest, right? That may not necessarily be happening here in terms of increased housing inventory. But I do trust Lawrence. I think he's a very knowledgeable individual, and it brings back that idea of median sales price tapering off with increased inventory. Keep in mind, again, our May median sales price was a consistent trend of about 5 to 6% for those years. We are now at 6% in the region, but only 4% here in the Twin Cities. So there's still some room for us to grow in our price growth that he may not necessarily be taking into account, right? So the wider economy, we aren't just going to talk about home prices directly. We'll talk about all those things impacting home prices. And one of those things that we got to keep mentioning time and time again, because it's only right that we're very keenly aware of what's happening here. I've mentioned it a few times already. Average 30-year mortgage, and over the past 12 months, it has started at just below 7%, increased to 7.8%, recorrected down to about 6.5%, and has marginally increased since the start of the year to about 7%. And I know there are some people who are still concerned with that idea of, well, is it ever going to go down? Now, let's keep in mind that idea that David and I want to remind people of, that historical average is around 7% for the 30-year mortgage rate nationwide, right? And yes, we are at a 20-year high, or we were last year, and we are coming right about back to where it was in 2005, 2006 for interest rates. But Federal Reserve does look like they're still struggling to reach their goal of a 2% increase in the consumer price index. That is the main factor here. And we all know in the business of our actual mortgages that the vast majority of people who have mortgages right now are below 5%, let alone the 7% that we're at right now, right? David created this. I don't know if he created it or if he nipped it from somebody, but either way, I'll give him credit for it. We are at a point where it feels high because the past 9 years we were at below 5%, right? But prior to that, we've seen much higher mortgage rates in the past. The reason why it feels different is because that ratio of cost of living to the actual price of homes in nominal value is a different version of reality for your clients in comparison to what people were feeling in the 80s and 90s when they had much higher interest rates, right? That's the equilibrium that I'm talking about that feels like it's harder, right? And that is the thing that the Federal Reserve is trying to uh, help gain control of. Because as you can see right here, this is their consumer price index of a year over year change. In 2022, our economy was inflating out of control. The value of the dollar was just not sustainable. And it hurts right now to have that dollar be valued less and less. And we're struggling to get down to that 2% threshold. Same chart, just me making it in Excel so that way you can see that 2% threshold. That's where they're trying to aim to, right? And we've talked about this before, the idea of shelter. Now, shelter here includes home ownership costs, mortgages, utility bills, but also rent. Shelter includes both home ownership and rent is the important thing that I want you to get attention to here, is still up 5.5% year over year. And bringing back that idea that it's not just necessarily us in the Midwest here that are growing at 6%, it's prices in different areas that are much more disproportionately sellers markets, hyper competitive markets, even still, not just necessarily pointing to the West, but it is other areas that are potentially exacerbating this problem as opposed to us here. Again, another reminder for you, we are at close to where we were prior to the pandemic, and we've corrected, right? And at the end of the day, the main goal of what we're looking to do, the whole purpose, the big sale of home ownership, right, is that we want to see this growth. Let's take these numbers away and actually just show you the line here. This is from InfoSparks. It's just to simplify it down here for you to show you what we're aiming to accomplish for our clients, buyers, sellers, the same, is consistent, reliable investment of their dollars and stable, valuable housing at the same time. Now, that could be super luxury, and that could be a studio apartment in downtown St. Paul, right? But both of those achieve the same type of benefit that we're highlighting here, that consistent price growth over time with stable housing, right? Now, I get you. Part of this just comes down to it's a monthly payment bill business and your monthly prices are not the same as they were, right? And this is the point where I will say, yes, interest rates are part of that because interest rates had historically offset price gains. As you can see here in 2021, 2022, you can see the impact of uh, uh, lower interest rates prevented this shoot up from 1,700 to 2,700 in principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. But that could only last for so long given how our dollar value was going down, inflation was not sustainable. This is that correction that you are seeing to $2,700 a month. This, by the way, if you're unfamiliar with it, which I'm sure some of you already are, this is how the median priced home and how much it would cost, assuming 10% down, a 1.2% tax rate, and 0.5% of the value of the home in insurance, making some of those more common assumptions to give you a rough idea of what median monthly prices might be, right? But let's put that monthly payment in context. mortgage payments take up a larger share than they have in the past 20 years. That is true. But that threshold of 25.8, let's say 26%, right, is still below the federal housing and urban development's regulation of what housing affordability looks like. Overall, large picture, there are absolutely some areas that aren't matching this, even here in the Twin Cities, right? But in the general scheme of things, we're not as bad as some areas of the country. The percent of median household income spent on mortgage payments here in Minnesota is not like it is on the West Coast. You can see why I was generally highlighting the West as a region earlier. Or Florida, or New York, or Massachusetts, or Colorado, or Washington, or Hawaii. We are in a relatively, again, relatively affordable place where you're still seeing reasonable price growth to realize the value of your home ownership investment. And that's something that you can communicate. And another thing, and I wish I had the slide, I'll just say it. Mid 1970s, and I apologize, I'm paraphrasing. Mid 1970s, the interest rate was at a similar, perceived as a similar all-time high, right? If someone were to have said, "Oh, I'll wait for interest rates to go down to where they were prior to the economic trigger," and it could have been the oil embargo back in the 70s. Either way, if I wait until interest rates go down, it'll save me money in the long run, right? It would have taken an individual in the mid 70s 22 years for those interest rates to go down to where they were. And at that time, the appreciation of price growth, remember that curve that I was showing you? It would have been such a long period of time that the growth you would have gotten, even when making those monthly payments at a higher interest rate, your value of your home in many cases overall tripled or quadrupled and would have made up for the loss in extra payments due to interest rates. That's the old adage of the best time to buy a home was 20 years ago. The second time to buy a home is right now. It's because you don't have any guarantee when those interest rates will go back down. It could be 5 years. It could be 22 years. And as of right now, for the most part, home price forecasts from an average of 8 different entities say that we're going to have an appreciation in 2024 of about 2%. The only one who's being a little bit more bearish here is Realtor.com. And in the long run, we know that that estimated home price is going to increase from a 2% growth conservatively back to nationwide 4%, and probably similar to where we were at a point of economic stability prior to the pandemic that I've been showing you in that bar chart time and time again in this presentation. And this just goes to say, now that we're over time now, most agents know or have an idea of what's happening. Good agents can understand what's happening. And by understand, I mean they know the impacts of what's happening and what is contributing to the mechanics, right? Some of the details of what I've talked about in this presentation. Great agents, like the ones listening all the way through this, can explain what's happening. That's the axe sharpening that we talked about in the beginning of this presentation. And I am absolutely out of time, but I will, of course, stop right here and answer any questions that anybody has. Has anybody got any questions for me? We got the time. I'm not doing anything for like another half an hour. So if you guys want to ask me an in-depth question, happy to answer it. And while I am waiting for any questions, if you have any, I will let you know. Again, we got some MAR events coming up. This is for the recording in case you weren't here to catch it live for us. There are some upcoming events at the Minneapolis Area Realtors. We have a Young Professionals Boat Cruise on June 20th. Our Housing and Heels Pride Brunch on June 27th. In addition to that, we're hosting a Pride booth at the Twin Cities Pride Festival in Loring Park on June 29th and 30th. And then for our MAR members, we have a MAR appreciation event on August 14th here at the MAR office. All these details are available at our website. Hop onto our website, click on the calendar. You'll see links to all of these if you need to register for them. Registration links are there. Want to make sure that people know that we got a lot of member benefits going on here. If we have any questions, which I don't think I see any, I'll let you guys go. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation, whether it be live or recorded on YouTube. If you have any questions for me, my email is right there. Happy to answer any research or tech questions that you have. And as always, we'll see you next time at the next webinar. Bye, everybody.